So this is a little bit different. This is not a lab for chapter 7 that is going to be next, but this is pretty cool where the actual book, the mobile version in Cisco, gives us these scenarios and we have to try to answer them. So I am going to go and try to do these correctly. So this is for chapter 17, ownership and permissions. Again, lab will be next, linked below also when it is up. But first, we have this scenario 1, directory access, and we are told to look at this and based on the following information, what access would the user Bob have on the files abc.txt? So when I look at this and when I think the system looks at this, first we need to look at the directory, which is this slash, and it belongs to the root. The root is the user and the root is the group. And so since Bob is not a part of this, we need to look at the world permissions, which would be these three right here. So we're able to read and execute on this, which is good. So that means we're going to go down into the dash data part, which is the directory. We're able to execute and go into it. So now we have the read permission, but we only have the read permission. And since we can only read it, we can't execute into the dash data dash abc.txt. So we are not going to have any access to the file abc.txt. If we click next, we can see that the answer is correct none. And then there's a more in-depth explanation to why this is right here. Next, we have scenario 2, viewing directory contents. Based on the following information, who can use the ls command to display the contents of the /data directory ls/data? So looking at this, again, we have root. I think this is all the same information. When we look at this slash, we have root execute for global. That means that anyone can execute into the dash data directory. So now we're in here. We have the read permission. Well, since ls is just reading it, we are able to read into the dash data, not the dash data.abc, because we can't execute into this line. But anyone, because this is world permissions, with the read right here, since we have a R, that means that we can read the contents of the dash data directory. If we do next, we see that all users can, and then we have a more explanation right here. In the next scenario, in 17.7.3, scenario 3, deleting directory contents, we are told based on the following information who can delete the dash data abc.txt file. When we look at this, first we're going to look at the actual directory, so the slash part. We have the root, so we're going to need the global if we are looking at Bob. So the global part is this last three characters. We have the R, the dash, and the X. The R meaning read, the dash meaning that there's no write, and then the X meaning the ability to execute. Since we want to be in this file and we can execute, we are going to move down a directory into the dash data. Now in the dash data, we see that we have the read and the write permission, but we don't have the execute permission. This means that any world user cannot execute into the next directory, which is where our dash data dash abc.txt is. And since we cannot execute into here, we can't get into here, we cannot delete this file. And since world users cannot delete this file, now we're going to look at group users. Group users is this next three right here. Again, we can read and execute. That means we're going to go into this directory. Same thing here though, we can only read and write. That means we cannot execute into this directory. Now we look at the user permissions, and the user is our root because it's stated here and it's at the top of the directory. So we can read, write, and execute here, and same thing with this one. So we can execute into our dash data.txt, and then inside of here we can see that we can read, write, and execute. Since the root user has all permissions for this file, we can delete it, but only the root user can delete it. Clicking next, we get the explanation and the answer. In 17.7.4 scenario 4, accessing the contents of a directory, we are told, or we are asked, true or false, based on the following information, the user Bob can successfully execute the following command, which is more/data/abc.txt. Well, we have a slash here, and this is the root. So to get into here, we need to look at the world permissions. This is going to be the last three right here. We can see that everyone has the ability to execute this. So we're going to be into the next part, which is the /data. Now that we are in the directory, we want to look at specific files. To do this, we need an executable. So we need an X. Well, if we look at the last three here, we see that we have an X, so we are allowed in here and we can execute. Now we look at the user permissions, since we are at the user level and we are inside of the directory. Looking at the user permissions is the first three right here. We have read, write, and execute. So we're able to read, write, and execute with this file. And since the question asks if we can execute the following command, we can, because we have an X here, meaning we can execute. And then this is the more in-depth explanation and the answer. In 17.7.5 scenario 5, we are told true or false. Based on the following information, the user Bob can successfully execute the following command, more/data/abc.text. So when we look at the script that we are given, we first need to look at the world permissions because we're given root and root. So we need the world to get into our actual directory. Looking at the world, we have a read and an execute. We do not have a write, but that does not matter. Since we can execute, all we need is the X, we can get into the next level or the lower level, which is /data. Now that we are in /data, we look at the world again and we see that the last three are just lined. We have no permissions using the world. So now we're going to look at the group permissions. And we can see that Bob, since it's asking for Bob, it's what we're going to be looking at, is a part of the Bob group. We don't know if he is or is not a part of the payroll group. The world users do not have access to this. So the only way to access this is if you are the actual user or the group member, because the user and the group members have the R, which is read, and the X for execute commands. So if he is not part of the payroll group, that means he will not be able to execute this. However, if he is part of the payroll group, we are going to be able to execute into this directory since we have the X here for our group members, and then we're going to be down here, and the user Bob has all the permissions which he is allowed to do. Again, Bob can only execute this command if he is in the payroll group. If he is not, then he is not able to. So not enough information is given here. If we click next, we can see that, and we can also see the explanation for this. In 17.7.6 scenario 6 permission priority, we are asked true or false. Based on the following information, the user Bob can successfully execute the following command, more/data/abc/text or .text. So looking at this script, we are going to, well, we're first going to look at the root user and the group name. We'll notice that, and we're going to look at the world permissions since Bob is not a root user. So we have R and execute, meaning we can read and execute. Since we can execute, we're going to move down to the next level, which is -data. We see that we have Bob and Bob in here. So we need to look at the user. And the user, we can read and execute, meaning that's great. We can go into this directory, and now we are going to look at this file part. Since we are in this directory, we are going to try to run it. However, we can see that we don't have the appropriate permissions for Bob, the user, here. It's all lined out. If we look at this next part, the read and write, we still don't have an executable, however the world does. That means that the world can read, write, and execute the file. However, oh, and also the group can read and write to the file. However, the user Bob cannot. Even though he is part of the Bob group, if you are the head user of the group, then the permissions will default to user permissions. That means the group and the world have more permissions than Bob does. So this is not great permission priority, which is part of the example. Clicking next, we can see the explanation for this, lesson learned, and the answer. And that is all of the scenarios inside of this chapter.